Good morning. It's 8 o'clock and it's great to see everyone this morning at the intersection. My first announcement is going to be, don't forget to vote. Vote. How does the funny saying go? And as often as possible. What is that line about? But don't forget to vote. So as you probably know, early voting is done. And the deciding voting is on Saturday. So it is Saturday, right? Yeah, okay. See, I was just checking. Yes. Right. Anyway, so don't forget to vote. It's really important. And if you have other people in your life, encourage them to vote. I'm sure you have other people. If you have younger people in your life, encourage them to vote, especially if they've never voted before and they are of the age that they can. You know, we need to get into that practice. Many of us are familiar with spiritual practices. Prayer is a spiritual practice. Practice is what changes literally our brain by repetition. It builds stronger neural pathways. And our country, our city, our state, our world could use more people voting and voicing. So if we can help others practice as well, that would be a worthy endeavor. While we're waiting for more others to sign in, are there any other announcements out there that wish to be shared? And if so, just raise a hand or start talking.
Good morning. Everyone, look at the chat box. There's the registration link for the next series of compassionate integrity training. And hopefully you're thinking about the Big San Antonio Summer Institute, which will start mid-July. Now, we hope that people will do the 10 sessions of compassionate integrity training, which is really very, very good grounding. Compassion for self, for others, infusing compassion in systems.
Thank you, Martha Ann. Does anybody even have questions about that for her? Or any other announcements?
And Sonia is in compassionate integrity training right now. It's a joy to have her.
Yeah, it's good to have her.
And don't forget that next week we're starting the clergy domestic violence training, a 4-week training, Thursdays at 11:30. I'll post the link to register. Please share it. You don't have to be a clergy to go and attend and learn more about how to help people who are in these situations.
Thank you, Lisa. And there's going to be, thank you for announcing that because it reminded me there's going to be a press conference next Wednesday, the 10th at 9 a.m. on the steps of City Hall. Out of the domestic violence prevention via faith community collaborative that has come out of At the Intersection and other work. We'll be making announcements at that press conference about an upcoming billboard and bus wrap campaign that's coming. Love should not hurt. And it will also be announcing this 4-part series, all geared towards the general population, which about 90% consider themselves as persons of faith or spiritual or religious, but all of it geared towards the faith community and stepping up in this situation that we find ourselves in. So Wendy has her hand up, and so does Lori Packard.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Wendy Holbrook with Interfaith San Antonio Alliance. And I would want to make you aware and invite you that our next lunch meeting will be on Tuesday, May 16th. It will be at the Archdiocese there on West Woodlawn. we're going to be hearing about breaking down walls with regard to understanding each other as people of faith. And there will be a presentation by Reverend Paul Cease, followed by a panel discussion with Rabbi Ricky Arad and Reverend Robert Jimerson and Imam Abdul Hakim. It's going to be a very engaging session. And then we'll also be talking about ways to make compassion an answer in our communities over the rhetorics of hate that we keep hearing more and more about that are so oppressive. So I will put the information in chat. We hope you can join us.
And Lori?
Yes, I'd also like to remind people that NAMI's Bridges to Care, also next Wednesday, May 10th, from 1 to 2 p.m. in the afternoon, we'll be presenting a session on the impact of domestic violence on children. And our speaker for that presentation will be our good friend Patricia Castillo from the Peace Initiative. So you can go to Bridges to Care website to register for that. Thank you.
And thank you all. So it's 8:06 and we're going to move into our briefing this morning. I don't know about all of you, but I have been hearing, if nothing else, small side conversations, thoughts, words about AI, artificial intelligence. And I mean, we've been hearing about that for like years, but there's some things that are happening more currently where, you know, students can have their entire paper written through AI for a class. Anyway, so I'm just hearing all sorts of little tidbits about it. So I asked Billy Cox, who's usually here and still here today doing the recordings. He's one of the tech gurus with SACRD.org, but I asked him to bring a briefing about AI and how that might intersect with our work. But what I want to do first is take in a very official poll and survey. And since most of you do not have your screens open, I encourage you to go down to the reactions at the bottom of your page, click on it, and you should see a thing pop up that says raise hand. So in this very official survey, right, I'm going to be asking a couple questions. So how many of you think that technology, so I'm going to go on some extreme statements here, can save the world? Look at Bill and Mamet and Joseph. Oh gosh, we've got some, you know, this is good. Okay. Next question. How many are you aware of a specific situation where technology has saved someone? Okay, lower hands. A little bit more there. I mean, if you start to think about people who have surgery, right there, there's technology that's happening. So that's a one to think about. How many find technology frustrating at times or all the time? Or and Martha Ann's clapping. I'm not quite sure what that means. But, okay, lower hands. How many of us think that technology could be our demise? Again, this is a very official survey, right? How many, and then lower hands. How many are aware that right now we're using technology? So this is my actual question to see if everybody is listening and awake because we are using technology. Okay, lower hands. Last question. How many folks try to the best of our abilities to realize that technology both has potential, but for good, and potential for not so good? So two sides of the same coin. So Billy, you have kind of a sense where we are all at. Does that help? So now I'm going to hand it over to Billy for the briefing. Thanks for doing this. I asked Billy last week if he would do this. And he said, I don't know, I'm going to need some time. And then he goes, no, I think I can do that. So Billy.
I said, I want to need some time. And you said, well, you got till Thursday. What's the problem here? Maybe one last, do any of you, one question today, do any of you use artificial intelligence every day that you know of? If you raise your hand, if you know of AI that you're using every day. Interesting. Lower hand. So it turns out you probably are every day. And I'll give you some examples of that as we go through. Now, some of us who have maybe are a little older than the younger crowd will remember the movie, and you may think of artificial intelligence as Hal, right? He was kind of a good guy, but ended up being a bad guy. Maybe that's what you think of AI, or perhaps you think of the robot in Terminator. He was AI. I gotta love the eyes, how they make it look really sinister there. I don't know about you though. This is kind of what I'm looking forward to, where there's an AI-driven robot in my home that will clean the kitchen and do the necessary chores around the house. Not too sure about the one-eyed Cyclops version. That was a Hitachi home robot, and I can imagine the kids kind of going to bed at night going, I'm not getting near that thing. So what is AI? AI stands for artificial intelligence. It really refers to a set of computer programs and algorithms trying to emulate human intelligence. We often see them in things like visual recognition, speech recognition, decision making, language translation. The thing that makes AI different from a lot of previous attempts has to do with something called machine learning, which is really how we teach the computer how to give us the response we want. And I'll walk through some examples of that in just a moment. The hard thing, I guess, as a techie, when I started working, when I was at the HP, people always wanted me to tell them what is cloud computing. Well, it's kind of like, it's some stuff somewhere else, right? You don't ever actually use cloud computing, but we're actually using it right now. Zoom servers are actually sitting in Amazon infrastructure. So AI is really just an architecture. At the end of the day, that's really all it is. And AI is just a tool. And a tool can be used to drive a nail in, or it can be used to listen to us talk and turn it into text. In fact, interestingly enough, some things that used to be, ooh, that's really hard stuff. That's, that was an AI thing, like character recognition, is now turned into just so commonplace that it's generally not considered using AI. So if you have Adobe, the reader, there's a way to convert a PDF back into a Word doc, and it uses what they call optical character recognition to do that. And how many of you know that when you write a letter to somebody and you address it on the front and you handwrite it in that language that new kids can't read, called script, that the post office can actually still read that. They have tools that can read that. I'm not sure we consider that AI any longer because it's so commonplace. So you have to ask the question, if it's not AI now, was it ever? I don't know. That's too philosophical for me. So AI is really about learning, about what we call machine learning. And in case you forgot, there was a guy who ran some experiments on a dog, Pavlov's dog, and taught him to do all kinds of things based upon reactions to things. And I have to say, teaching a computer to do things is a lot the same as Pavlov's dog, right? We give it training data. And then when we give it the situation back again, guess what? We get the data out that we put in. Big shock, right? We trained it, so guess what? We're going to get back at what we put in. That sounds fine, but let me give you an example where maybe it might go sideways on you. Let's say you're using a tool to screen resumes to find the best candidate for some job. But when you did the training, you only gave it resumes of men. Then what do you think the probability is it's going to select resumes of women when you get going? Right. So the training quality of the training data matters a lot. And sometimes that quality of the training data can have what we call unintended consequences. It somehow is not selecting that. By the way, that's a real example of a resume screener that a company put together. And when they started analyzing it, they found out it was selecting predominantly men, dominantly men. And that was one of the things they figured out. So you got to be really careful. So today we use speech recognition. I don't know how many of you, when you get a voicemail from somebody, you go read the text of the voicemail before you listen to it. Back in the early days, speech recognition was done. The first approach was done based on a pure analytical. We learned to decode the sounds and match the phonemes to words, and then pull the words together into sentences. And then Google happened. Google said, "To heck with that nonsense. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few billion samples of sound sequences, and I'm going to pair them with the words that's what's actually said in there. Book could be English, could be Spanish, could be Portuguese, could be whatever. And then after a few billion training runs, I'll have the output. So guess what? It works pretty good. If we want, we can get a translation of this Zoom session, and it uses those same basic techniques, slice it into sound segments and get the translations for them. And that's probably one of the cleaner examples of AI, because we trained it on the data that we need. And the fun part about that is that you can have a Texas accent and it still recognizes you versus Australian versus British. It knows the difference and it might even know which accents you have based upon the way you say the words. But the training data lets it have such phenomenal outputs. Now, when they first started, of course, not so good, but gotten better. There's a lot of interesting argument online as to whether factory robots are based upon AI. My personal view is that they're not, because they're programmed by an engineer to do a task. There's no real training involved here. We didn't take the robot out and let it make mistakes and then train it to do it right. Now, there are some cases in the electronic space, especially where we use cameras as well as medical, and those begin to encroach on the AI because they use the camera and then use training data based upon the camera to try to figure out what it needs to do next. There are some other interesting examples of where AI has come to play. Whenever you do a credit card transaction, that transaction is looked at by your credit card company through some tools that have been trained to recognize fraudulent transactions, which is kind of interesting. So let's say you hardly ever travel, you're only ever in San Antonio or Bexar County, and then suddenly you go to Kendall County and you try to fill up your car, and it might say, "Hey, you never buy gas anywhere but Bexar County, so what's going on?" So maybe it gets a little too restrictive. But the incentive for the credit card companies to minimize the fraud has driven them to use tools like AI. And of course, for better or for worse, they have lots and lots of fraudulent transactions to train the system on, for whatever it's worth. There are some more examples of AI, and we can debate whether they're useful or not, or good or not. Facial recognition. We know that cameras are placed at interesting places. Like if you go into a stadium, I wouldn't be surprised to find out there's a camera scanning all the faces to see who showed up to the baseball game. That wouldn't shock me at all. On the other hand, I'm not sure I want them scanning to figure out, did I turn that corner when I was walking away from the bank? Do I really want them to know that? When you use Google Maps or other maps, Bing or whoever, there's some AI sitting behind that. Because if you watch it carefully, you'll notice it never gives you the absolute shortest route, because that would usually cut through parking lots and who knows what. They also never give you the absolute fastest one. because that might end up only putting you on freeways, which might or might not be the best way to go. They often recommend a fuel efficient route, and they do that through training. And a lot of times they're looking at our data from our phones in order to get that training data. I love autocorrect. You know, anybody a great lover of autocorrect? I don't think autocorrect is AI because there's no training involved, clearly. You know, if it was trained, then they definitely used a pretty bad data set to go do that. So these are some examples of AI and some what I think are not AI. And I hope you get the sense that if I use facial recognition to try to track down a criminal, okay, that's probably generally, I think we would agree that's a good use. But if I'm using AI just to track people around to find out what they do, I'm not real comfortable with that. That doesn't feel like a good thing in society to be doing. So based upon how you use it, it could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. And you saw my example of the factory robots. So that's displacing people. Well, it's displacing people doing a rather mundane job. So you have to ask, based upon the level of computing that we have now and our knowledge of the training, when do we think we might see a human level of machine intelligence? And this was put together by some research groups, and I think they're being pretty optimistic personally, but they're saying in 50 years, there's better than a 50% chance we'll have computers of machine level intelligence or human level intelligence. Well, I think that's fascinating and interesting, but I like navigating. I like having help on navigating strange places. So the fact that might be a better tool at finding routes through complex situations, I'm actually okay with that. I probably wouldn't do as good as it does. There's some interesting cases in healthcare that are actually deployed now, where the machine will look at your health record and look at your current situation and give ideas and examples to the doctors that they can then use. And you know what? I hope that machine intelligence is a whole lot smarter than the smartest doctor. That'd be really cool. That might not be able to play chess or might not be able to walk on 2 feet, but if it can help my doctor find a better solution, I think I'm pretty much okay with that. So, when you see this kind of stuff, kind of put it in a box and say, yeah, okay, fine, but how does it really depends on how it's used far more than just as at machine level intelligence, human level. There's we've seen some examples recently of making pictures or even making videos of people. I think this is going to be something it's going to be a thorn in our side. We're going to have to learn how to deal with this. These are pictures generated by AI over the course of about a 4-year window. And by the end, they're getting pretty photorealistic. And I think we'll see more of those as time goes on. Do I want to have somebody, do I want to have a robot replace a person doing a highly repetitive task? Bottom left here is a robot doing some drilling holes in a piece of metal. Well, I'm not sure I want a human doing that. Humans tend to get bored and not drill the right hole in the right spot. And so I think there are some cases where some jobs might be better off done by a machine, but let's don't forget they still have to be programmed, monitored, and managed by a human somewhere. And the trick is you got to keep training people, or otherwise they do get left behind. And do I really want a robot taking care of my granddaughter all day? Not at all. On the other hand, could they make sure the child is safe and fed and do some of the basic play games with them? That feels like that part might be okay, as long as there's a lot of heavy human intervention interaction there. So are these robots going to take over the world? Are these AIs? I'm one of those that says, no, I don't think so. I think we're going to see a lot of uses where they get really, really strong value to us, and others not so much. And there will be a happy medium. Now, is it possible that some military somewhere might trust an AI to launch weapons? Okay, I think that's bordering in the case of bad. right? Because if there's no human in the middle there to say, wait, the situations aren't exactly what we thought we were going to get. So now you have to ask the question, do you care why do you care about AI? Well, it's just a tool. And so if the tool adds value to your life, then that's a good thing. But if it doesn't add value to you, then it's not a good thing. So let's say as a community partner, you're using QuickBooks, and let's say that somebody came up with a tool that could look at your QuickBooks transactions and identify potential cases of fraud. Hey, that might be useful. That'd be okay, right? If they're watching your credit card transactions to make sure your employees aren't doing bad things, at SACRD, we might use AI-based tools to improve our search results. So that when you come in and do something, we might say, hey, because people who looked at this have also found these other things useful. Okay, those could be places where we would use it. At the end of the day, though, you're not going to go into the market and say, hey, I want to go look for some AI. You're going to go into the market and say, I have this problem with my books. I'm not able to spot bad transactions. I need some help with it. And I found this toaster online, and my toaster has one button that says go, right? And I don't know how you need a toaster with this many buttons. I haven't quite figured that out yet. But AI to me is a tool. I use a hammer to drive a nail in. I don't use it for other purposes. And when I don't need to drive a nail, I don't use it. And so there will be cases where you'll use AI. And in those cases, I'm not too concerned. We've all seen the news that the Google AI chief recently quit. He was worried about, he says he was worried about the fears of how his life's work's being used. Google's a complex company with lots of super smart people working on lots of different things, and we don't know what all was in the dynamics of the work that he was doing. So I'm not sure we should read a whole lot into it. The fact that there are a group of people who care enough to go take their time now and go try to make sure we use AI wisely, that feels like a good thing. I'm pretty happy with that. I noticed this morning that the federal government has set up a commission to establish the rules against which federal agencies have to adhere when they want to use artificial intelligence in the activities that they do. Now, I'm pretty sure that'll take them far longer to do than we would think it would take, and they'll end up with a pretty watered down solution, but it's a step in the right direction. And those are always the things we have to do. The folks that manage our power grid, I hope they use AI to let them anticipate and manage the power grid better. I hope they don't put that AI in charge of making decisions. In my book, that would be a very bad thing to go do. How many of you have used Google Translate? It's an amazing tool, right? You can type in a sequence. Yeah, there you go, and it translates it for you. Now, what I've come to learn, thanks to some native Spanish speakers, is it tends to give you pretty formal Spanish. Thankfully, not Spain Spanish, but it tends to give you Mexico City Spanish, the fairly formal. So it doesn't know Tex-Mex, and it doesn't know coastal Spanish, but it gives you Spanish. That's pretty amazing.
It can get you to the bathroom.
Yeah, it will. Yeah.
Billy, we're going to take a pause.
Yep.
It's 8:28. And while we're pausing, you might want to look in chat. There have been a couple interesting things there. And I invite everybody to be thinking, because we're going to shift into conversation and Q&A. But I'm pausing now for all those who might need to go. Thank you for being here today. Next week, our briefing is going to be on Compassionate USA. And it's going to be brought to us by folks at Alamo Colleges who have been designing the campaign and many courses that go with that. So they'll be talking to us about content. Maybe we'll get a sneak preview. And I also understand that we have a surprise guest next Thursday morning. So you'll have to show up to find out who that surprise of a guest is. So thank you. If anybody out there wants to post again on chat in terms of announcements, please feel free to do that. So, Billy, I hand it back to you. Others, if you want to start raising your hand or voice or question.
Well, I'm going to ask for some input here in just a moment. So you're right on for me now. So you've all seen Chat GPT. If you haven't, you need to go play with it. This is fun. So Chat GPT is an AI, artificial intelligence based tool that uses natural language query as its input. So I can type in questions, and it will produce a response. Okay. And some of these can be quite interesting. So my challenge to you is, what would you like to ask ChatGPT? I'm going to do 2 examples here and let you see what it produces. Excuse me, and you can see that this is pretty interesting. You know,
And it
came up with
works so
obviously a
quickly. I mean, you
Yeah.
typed in the question and I didn't count, but I should have been counting seconds.
Yeah, it's like 10
Before it
seconds,
started
and
responding.
it comes up with a fairly reasonable, answer. Now, clearly, the folks that did this are trying to come up with a politically correct answer, but that's interesting in and of itself, right? So we are here to talk about the intersection of compassion and community and the topics like that. So I thought it might be interesting. What if I asked ChatGPT to write me a short article on the intersection of compassion and community? What would that do, right? Turns out it gives a pretty good answer. It's one of those, wow. Now it's going to blink a cursor at me. That's encouraging. Well, a lot of people must be generating their their term papers right now. It's a little slower than it was yesterday. So I challenge you. What questions would you ask ChatGPT?
I'm appreciating what's being written. I don't know if everybody can read it. Is everybody's eyesight good enough to read that?
I should be able to make it bigger.
I'm following, but
That's really slow today. There must be a bunch of us using their system
well,
today.
it is end of the semester. Well, my son-in-law teaches at both UTSA and Incarnate Word, and he teaches writing. And one of his supervisors asked that he write. So to ask somebody who teaches writing, right, to write something about the shortfalls of Chat GPT in terms of students utilizing it to write papers, beyond the obvious that they aren't writing it, right? Beyond that, what are the shortfalls in terms of education, in terms of what it would mean then to our society, like the bigger impact? What does that mean? We see a powerful force for social change and individual growth.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, that's not soft words.
No, when people come together in a spirit of compassion, they're able to create a sense of belonging and connectedness that can help to overcome feelings of isolation, loneliness, and disconnection. That
Someone
reminds
says,
me, this Surgeon General came out this week on social isolation with some information. I'm going to send out all of those documents to At the Intersection. I invite you to look at that work he's doing.
I don't know how many of you see late night TV, but many, many, many years ago, when automated translations first came out, one of the late night guys had brought on a Hispanic lady, and the two of them sang a duet where they took the words of a song and ran it through one of the automated translators about 20 times. So they ran it from English to Spanish, Spanish to English, English to Spanish, iterated over and over again. And by the end, the general concepts remained, but it was hilarious in the way that it translated. I tried that yesterday with the Google Translate. I gave it a paragraph and went back and forth and back and forth. It ended up with virtually exactly the same thing I started off with. So it kind of gives you a measure of how much they've improved over time.
Oh, look at that. It's even got, they don't call it that, but the golden rule, basically, when we are able to see the world through the eyes of others. and recognize their humanity and dignity.
Isn't that incredible?
We're most likely to work together to create a more just and equitable society.
So Sonia said the professor restricted them to using, and I like Lori's response. Well, how do you know how does a professor know? I mean, this is pretty good stuff, right?
But I think they use AI as well. I mean, the professors themselves have AI that they use for plagiarism before
Yeah,
this
yeah.
writing tool even came out. So I don't know how all that works, but it's all AI.
Of course, Bill points out that this looks like it's producing new information. In fact, what it really is, and Bill is saying this, that all it is doing is replaying the data that we've already had. Bill, you want to comment?
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that this data, it's worth noting on ChatGPT what questions it won't answer. Ask it a question about how do I invest my money in stocks, right? Or what stock should I buy to get a 20% return in a year? Or you ask it a question about how to engage in a violent behavior. The model will not answer those questions. But that was a decision that was made by the creators of the model. It's not that the model can't answer those questions, it's been instructed not to. And so think about that the model can answer those questions. So if the creators of the next version of this choose not to build in that restriction, now you get into the what people talk about as the existential threat of these types of tools. So I think wondering what it can do, is in what asking what it won't do is just as I think is as you think about how should we be regulating this? How should we be controlling this as a society? I think is key here as well.
We had a question posed in chat. I think, Kenneth, your question is interesting. Let's see if it can come up with something. And as always, we get the blinking cursor, right? This ChatGPT is a very complex AI. This is not even this is well beyond language translation. There are many layers of training that have gone into this with a complex set of data. This is on the level of what they do. They played the Jeopardy game with against a computer. That's massive data sets of training there. Well, hopefully you get a sense. There's if you can train a computer, it can probably regurgitate it. I like Bill's point that the creators of the system may put boundaries on it, or they may not. They may choose wisely about allowing it to initiate action, or they may choose poorly. So it's not the data set that you train against matters. I choose to hire a diverse set of candidates. I don't want just white guys. On the other hand, if I choose to let it select resumes and then do the hiring, I've probably turned the corner. But that's my action, not necessarily artificial intelligence. Other questions or comments? Bill, thanks for jumping in.
Good morning. This is David. Oh, I'm sorry.
Come on, David.
Go, David.
Good morning, everyone. I am so glad that we're talking about this artificial intelligence. Coming from the world of technology myself, I feel like a lot of technologists owe the world an apology for the unintended consequences that we're facing today from a lot of the technology that we felt that we had a hand in providing or developing and or even had a partake in producing to the world. We look at some of the statistics that is coming out with this mental health issues and or suicides within the youth, how dependent people are becoming with technology and the lack of access and or information that is provided in there. As artificial intelligence is getting more robust, I do believe that we do have to take a look at the input who is providing the input into artificial intelligence to be able to provide the level of its output, and how that can change the behavior of people in general. My big skepticism and big scare is that we already know that in the world of social media, they have this little dial, not trying to change your behavior, by 10, 20%, but fractionally by 0.1%. And they can dial up that dial to continuously get you to change your behavior in a manner that they see fit. So without regulations in place that provide some level of ethical, ethical practices, it's really, really, really scary for me to see just how advanced these infrastructure and these systems have become. And I'm going to be curious as we go into the future on what regulations or compliance agencies will be put in place to ensure there's ethical behavior occurring in the world of artificial intelligence and technology. There was no real question. It was just a thought that just came to my head as you're talking about this, Billy. I think this is great. Some of the information that you just submitted is fantastic. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, David. That you're hitting a sore point for me, which is how it can be used, I'll say, for not always good. Looks like Kendra Lee has a question or comment.
I had a question, Mr. Cox. If would it be commonplace to use it as a reference that you've used it in the bibliography form? I mean, can it be used as a reference in the bibliography form?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, isn't it? So, I can just imagine me turning in a paper with some quotes from an article generated by ChatGPT, and my, my professor going, that's not a factual source, right? But, there's, so I don't think so. I think not. I think these are tools to let you go find factual data, maybe let you evaluate the efficacy of something, but it's not a referenceable source, at least in my worldview.
Yes, and that would be my first initial response, but some people do reference Wikipedia.
Yeah, and you do so in my book at your own peril too. There's a best effort factual basis within Wikipedia.
So I think Kendra Lee has a question, and I think we have time for that question. It's 8:42.
Hi, I just wanted to build on what David said because he is my mentor and we have talked about this. And I've thought about it extensively. So I'm glad we had this session today because I do think it's something that my generation on up, being like a Zennial where I had technology half the time and then half the time I didn't touch a computer until 6th grade and it weighed more than I did, the political implications and the implications with children and mental health, they're just, I guess we would have never known what this virtual reality could have done to our society without ever implementing it. So now we're seeing that. But government has really got to catch up on the way that these safeguards, just like they do with asbestos or pesticides on the farms that got into my grandpa's lungs, that gave him COPD, DDT and all that, killing all the bald eagles. It's hard to know these things until we put it out in the world and see what it gives us back. But I do agree that we really have to catch up on the way that we regulate these things, because the damage that it does cause is unchecked, and the people that are just running with that, like some political candidates and spies and companies that have bad intentions, is really. But I guess that's with everything. That's all I wanted to say. Sorry, I guess I was just thinking out loud. Thank you.
Thinking out loud is an important thing.
It is.
100%.
And Kendra, it's not necessarily AI, but I think it's very creepy how you can browse, let's say in Amazon, to go look up something you're interested in buying, and then you shut down your computer and you pull up your tablet and you go into Facebook, suddenly you're getting ads on that thing you looked up. You know?
Well, and that's like a whole other, that's like a
That's-
whole all of worms. Like, how much do we want to honor capitalism that we just completely give
yeah.
it, eye into our life and changing, like Dave, changing our behavior, like just by sitting and looking at a screen. There has to be some regulations in the way we view capitalism as well, because I really think that drives a lot of this unethical behavior.
And that's also where compassion comes in, getting back to that even basic ethic of reciprocity. So how do we employ that in policies and regulations? So it's 8:45. I want us all to take a moment to look at Candace in the screen. Next week, we all need to wear hats because Candace looks like she has a halo on. And so I love it. I just had to note the halo effect. So next week, everybody wears a hat and we will all have halos. So next week, it's going to be on Compassionate USA. The briefing will be brought to us by those who are designing it and creating the information and how we can all be a part of that and need to be a part of it. And we have a special guest coming. So hope to see you next Thursday at the intersection, and please start telling people about it. This AI is helping us intersect compassion and community in creating a better world. So we should take it at its best and invite others into it. Thanks so much. I will see you next Thursday. Have wonderful weekends. Thanks, Billy.
You bet.
Have a blessed day, everyone.